Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Aditya Kapoor, Faculty Retina Services at LB Prasad Eye Institute, Vijayawada. I welcome you all to our IC OCT Biomarkers in Retinal Disorders Demystified. OCT has revolutionized the diagnosis, treatment of various retinal disorders. And today, this IC will be highlighting the OCT biomarkers helping in early diagnosis, assessing response to treatment, and prognostication of common retinal diseases. We will be having 7 talks followed by a panel discussion. So, Dr. Umesh, can we start with you? Dr. Rajiv is yet to join.
Okay then.
Yeah, so I invite Dr. Umesh, a gifted surgeon, retina faculty at Bhubaneswar campus, for his talk on OCT biomarkers on wet ARMD. Over to you, Dr. Umesh.
A very good morning to you all and my panelists and the audience. So it's a pleasure to take part in this nice symposium talking on the OCT biomarkers. So we begin with neovascular AMD this morning. So why do we really need biomarkers in neovascular AMD? The first is that we need to predict the progression to the ominous neovascular complication or atrophic complication when the disease is in its early stages. Second, when it manifests, we need to also predict the visual outcomes. So at the beginning of the treatment itself, if we try to look at few of the clinical markers that can prognosticate the disease or inform the patient about the disease progress, that helps in a big way in the managing the patient. So let's begin with the progression of neovascular AMD, or to some extent, the geographic atrophy. Here, most of the times we have been hearing about the reticular pseudotrusion being implicated in the progression of AMD. So these are granular deposits, the photoreceptors, which are most commonly seen in intermediate AMD, and the risk of progression increases 2 to 3 folds if they are present right at the macula or at the fovea. So apart from this, the drusen characteristics also matter, like the drusen area and the volume. It's been seen that the drusen height, if it was more than 122 microns or the width was more than 511 microns, the risk of progression was very high. Apart from this, the hyperreflective foci, which represent the pigments migrating into the inner retina or the activated microglial cells. So they can be seen as bright dots more than the reflectivity of the RP underlying, and they have to be correlated with the fundus picture of a pigmentation. So these two characteristics of drusen and the adjacent structures generally predict the progression. One of the descriptions about the behavior of the drusen in the course of the disease is known as something called drusen ooze. So we all know that the drusen consists of membranous debris within its substance, but at times there could be some amount of clearing within these debris, and it may manifest as hyperreflective dots on top of the RP layer here into the sensory retina, and some iso or hyperreflective areas which represent collapse of the membranous debris within the RP. So it is nothing but ending of the PED components into the subretinal space and ultimately collapsing. So this is a case where we can see a confluent subdrusen at the macula, and on OCT we see some amount of subretinal fluid and a hyperreflective space within the PED. So this picture 3 months later shows little change, but when seen at 1 year, the PED has totally collapsed and the contents are totally released. And this is likely to progress to macular atrophy. So one of the recent publications about the fellow eye in the HARPO trial, when followed up over 2 years, showed that when the drusen appeared at the center of the fovea and when the mean height was 29 microns, they led to macular neovascularization. So if we look at a case example here, the patient presented in 2018. As you can see, there is barely any evidence of drusen at the center of fovea. But when the patient was seen a year later, one can easily see a rising peak here of small drusen. The vision was 20/20, hence the patient was not suspected of 2 months later, the patient presented with symptoms where we can see appearance of the subretinal fluid. So with the injections, the vision improved, but there was a persistence of subretinal fluid, and the drusen height had increased, and the RP layer was thicker and hyperreflective. So this is when the COVID struck and the patient was not able to return back for further treatments. But when the patient returned later, the vision had dropped significantly to 2250, and there was a fibrinousness accumulation subretinally. So with treatment, the patient regained some amount of vision, but it ended up with a dense scar at the macula. So what are the biomarkers which can predict scarring in such patients? So scarring can be predicted if the patient present with a well-defined hyperreflective material. So mostly find margin, or they present with a distinct line on top of the hyperreflective material, then they carry a higher risk of progression to neovascular AMD. And on top of that, if the composition of the hyperreflective material is heterogeneous at presentation, that also is a risk. The other risk is about the RP splitting. As you can see here, the RP layer splits into two. And this is at presentation. The presentation vision was 20/40, but despite best of the treatments, the patient ended up with a huge scar and gross loss of vision 2 years down the line. So one of the other ominous markers is the bridge arch subretinal fluid. So they are generally believed to be a result of the addition of the subretinal detachment by fibrin. Means it glues the both ends of the subretinal fluid, and it gives an appearance of a bridge arch. So this is a strong biomarker for scarring if followed up for a year. So what are the visual outcomes that are poor when we see a few of the biomarkers? One of the poor biomarkers is intraretinal cystoid changes, which are generally seen in type 2 or type 3 CNV, but in chronic cases of type 1 CNV also, we may find intraretinal cystic spaces. It's a marker for active lesion and also a poorer visual prognosis. Degenerative cyst in the same lines also carries an ominous risk. The other feature about this scarring prediction is having tubular structures in the outer retina. These are rearrangement of the photoreceptors in the outer retina with the fibrin, and they generally present when there is already an underlying scarring. So these lesions, if followed longitudinally, may show a complete collapse of these tubular structures, and they may merge with the underlying scar tissue. So what are the what are the good biomarkers which you can think of? So if the patient presents with just a subretinal fluid, a clear fluid, without any intraretinal cystoid changes, then it carries a better visual prognosis. But if the reflectivity within the subretinal fluid increase, means if it is turbid, then it might carry a poorer prognosis. Last but not least, we also should look for the stratification of the retina in the outer layers. So if the outer layer stratification like ellipsoid zone and external membrane are maintained, then the vision prognosis is generally good. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Umesh, for that illuminating talk. Next, we have Dr. Rajiv. He's the Vice Chairman of LV Prasad Eye Institute and excellent clinician. And he will be talking upon OCT biomarkers in PFT. Dr. Rajiv, over to you.
Thanks, Aditya, for including me in this instructive course. So let's go ahead with macular telangiectasia. So if you have seen the macular telangiectasia, though it's not the most common, hold on, yeah, the macular telangiectasia may not be the most common retinal disease which you encounter, but it's definitely the common thing which you keep seeing in a retina clinics. And it is not that severe when most of the time when you see these patients, you might come with the minimal problems, but then over a period of time they keep coming back, and you notice that it keeps progressing. And we have seen that it has been seen even in the families, and if you screen the people who are there in their families, you might even identify the early stages of macular telangiectasia to tell you that there is some genetic involvement in these type of cases. So at this point of time, we still are not able to treat them completely, and we can only treat the complications like subretinal neovascular membranes which form in these patients. So is there anything which non-invasively we can look at these patients and say whether we can help in identifying the visual prognosis in these patients, or is there any progress which can be predicted how these patients will progress? Because the most common question which these patients ask is this an AMD, and how will this progress? Am I going to go blind? So these are the two important things which we'll always keep worrying about. But what is the current knowledge which we have about this disease, at least in terms of an OCT and OCT angio, which would help us to give answers to these, is what I'm going to touch upon right today. So if you look at this image, this is what we see most commonly, and this is the earliest, it's not just the earliest stage of PFT. You see a pigmentation here, you see a graying here, and under an OCT you see the hyperreflectivity and a loss of retinal tissue here. So though you look at the retina, it might appear like there is an edema, but then you see a thinning of the retina here. So this is an actual OCT pictures, how you varied it can present. It's the same patient with both eyes. You'll see you can have one eye where there is already a pigmentation, and then the other eye you will have an early stage where there is minimal graying. But if you look at the OCT, so the most typical feature is this cavitation which we see inside the retina, and which is seen in both, and the loss of the ellipsoid zone and the loss of retinal tissue and becoming thinning out. This is the close-up look and how they progress over a period of time. So these are the most important things which we notice on OCT. Though there is some amount of vitreomacular traction here, but that's not the one which is implicating causing a macular hole or anything in this. This is mainly the tissue damage or an atrophy degeneration which is happening here. So that's why you see this, the whole area, that loss of tissue is noticed. And what you're seeing here is a pigment proliferation, what you're seeing here. So next thing what we notice in OCT is angiograph. So that's another area where we can actually look at what happens in these patients, because when you look at these patients, it's not just the tissue loss, but there are vascular changes which are happening there in those areas. So is there anything which we can identify in these places which we can give us an idea what happens in these patients? So this is a study by Spade where we actually they actually looked at what are the patterns of changes what we see in the retinal vasculature. So there are changes in at every level, the superficial level, intermediate, in the deeper levels, and even in cases where there is a vascularization, it happens inside the retina, it starts with. So these are the things which we notice. And if you see here in OCT, there will be an early stages where there will be bulbs at the end, and sometimes there is a dragging of the vessels like this, and then have change of architecture completely. And you do see a vascular flow in the outer retinal vessels. These are the changes which you might see in a macular telangiectasia OCT angiogram. So, and this is another example where you are actually seeing vascular changes at the superficial level and deep level, but you still have a pigmentation already there. So there is a varied presentation even at the different levels of disease, how the vascular changes are presenting. So there may not be an exact correlation with the staging of disease with vascular changes per se. And OCT angio is definitely useful in identifying the neovascularization which starts in the retina. So this is how beautifully neovascularization is picked up in using an OCT angiogram, which is not, a fluorescein angiogram would not pick this up that easily, mainly because of there is surrounding leakage of dye which is seen in these areas, and it might mask the neovascularization, whereas OCT angio will pick up these things very easily. So let's go to what are the studies. Are there anything which has been done to identify the markers which can predict the progress, or which can predict the visual potential of these patients? So one of the widely studied and accepted thing for as a biomarker for visual prognosis in these patients is ellipsoid zone mapping. So this is a study which is first published in IOVS long back in 2018. So from Maxwell Group. So they claim that the ellipsoid zone loss is one of the most common predictors of visual acuity in case of macular telangiectasia, followed up by another study again in by a Spade group, where we can actually see what's happening here. They actually mapped up the areas of ellipsoid zone loss and then try to correlate with the vascular changes using an OCT angiogram. Is there any way that that might help? even in this, they ended up saying that the ellipsoid zone is still law mapping is the one which is going to predict what is going to be the visual prognosis for these patients. And this is the one which we might want to use in any of the future studies at this point of time, whether we can predict the progress of the disease. So at this point of time, red zone mapping is one which is which can help. So there's another study which is showed that the retinal cavitations which I was talking about, there is a loss of tissue inside, whether they can look at the areas of retinal cavitations, like how you see here. So all these cavities are marked, and then coming up with the total area of retinal cavitation in that area in the macula, which can give us a prediction of how the correlation with the visual acuity is in these patients. So this study again has looked at correlation, but it's come out with cavitation definitely gives us some amount of idea of what and how the disease progresses. But when compared to ellipsoid zone, the ellipsoid zone still fares better than cavitation per se. So I would keep it as a second biomarker for prognosis of disease in macular telangiectasia. So that's the next thing. So other than this, looking at vascular networks, so closer to home, Dr. Ketan has presented published one series on how the vascular network looks like, and then is there any way that we can predict based on the vascular network whether there can be a prognosis can be predicted. So he has come up with division of type A and type B types of vascular networks, where the type A is where there is a lot of disorganization of structures, and there is dragging of the foveal vascular zone and then encroaching on the foveal vascular zone. Whereas type B is where you only see vascular bulbs and most of the...
Doctor, so sorry to interrupt, but you need to sum up within a minute.
Yeah, be done, don't worry. So when they looked at it, the type A is the one which had shown a better prognosis, at least to a certain extent, with area of improvement in anti-VEGF in these patients. So that's another area where we can look at. In summary, I would say ellipsoid zone is still the best biomarker for macular telangiectasia. The vascular nets is still an area where we need further studies to identify whether we can make a difference or not. So that's in short about, and most of the slides or images are given to me by Bhavik, Ketan, and Ravinash, and thanks for them. And thank you, Aditya.
Thanks, Dr. Rajiv, for that wonderful talk. Next, I will be inviting Dr. Rohit Modi. He's our LVPI alumni. He's a vitreoretina specialist from Mumbai, and he will be talking to us on OCT biomarkers in CSCR. Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks, Aditya, for making me a part of this wonderful instruction course, and thanks to AIOS. Aditya, is my slide visible?
Yes, your slides are visible. Please go on.
Sure. So choroidal thickness is increased in the patients of CSR when we see it on enhanced depth imaging. And it is primarily due to dilatation of the choroidal vessels. And it is greatest in the acute CSR, followed by chronic CSR, and followed by the normal eyes. Now, the same order is maintained when we look at the subfoveal choroidal thickness. And they were consistently higher in the same locus of the fovea, that was 750 microns from the fovea, suggesting that it is more of a localized disease rather than a diffused one. And the increased CT was also seen at the leakage sites in acute or resolved CSR. Now that indicates that we should repeat the scans at the same locus during the follow-up visits to pick up any recurrence. Here we can see that there is a diffuse choroidal thickening with thinning of the choriocapillary layers, and here we can see a focal increase in the choroidal thickness. Well, another important marker is the choroidal vascularity index. It's basically the ratio of the total choroidal vascular luminal area and the total choroidal area on OCT. Well, the choroid comprises of the choroidal vasculature and the interstitial stroma. Now, increase in CVI basically indicates there has been an increased vascular luminal area, and this increase is more in acute cases as compared to the fellow eyes and the age-matched eyes. Sometimes in the fellow eyes also it was higher than the age-matched eyes, indicates that there is bilateralitis of the CSR. And it does not change or improve with laser photocoagulation. That's an important point. Here we can see how CVI is calculated. Well, the top scan shows neurosensory detachment. There is elongation of the photoreceptor layers in patient, indicating chronicity. And middle scan shows there is an automated algorithm to mark the choroidal boundaries. And then the bottom scan shows the calculation of the CVI. Another important biomarker is the hyperreflective dots, which are correlated with the subfoveal choroidal thickness, central macular thickness, and the height of the neurosensory detachment. Well, the mean count of this HRDs is acute disease was significantly higher as compared to the chronic ones, and it may be due to the inflammatory response in the retina and the choroid. Here we can see how the HRD is calculated. Well, the original scan is at the topmost. The middle scan shows the choroidal boundaries, and finally the choroidal hyperreflective dots quantification is done. Another interesting sign is a flat regular PED sign, which can be picked up on the regular SD-OCT. It's not unique to the CSR patients, and it denotes a split in the RP and the Bruch's membrane. The important point is that it is predictive of type 1 CNVM, which initially may be non-exudative, and the treatment modality hence changes if there is type 1 CNVM. It's important to rule out CNVM in these cases, and OCT, angio, FFA, and ICG are also more useful than just OCT in these patients. Now, subretinal fluid basically, has optical density ratios which are slightly higher in PCV patients, as CSR and PCV patients may have similar clinical angiographic and tomographic findings, and they provide an insight to the pathogenesis. That is, difference in the SRF protein content highlights the integrity of blood-retinal barrier in both the disease processes. Here we can see the flat irregular PEDs which are noted. Now, in CME and cystoid changes, CME is basically cystoid changes along with leakage on fluorescein angiography, whereas CMD is cystoid changes without leakages on fluorescein angiography, and CMD indicates that there is a visual decline and it is a poor prognostic factor. The treatment can be challenging. It may require intravitreal injections or eplerenone. Here we can see a case report in which they had shown the effect of eplerenone on patients with cystoid macular degeneration following a month of therapy. We can see a subsequent changes which comes in the OCT. Here is a patient with 1 month of history and neurosensory detachment, which can be seen in acute CSR. Here, elongation of the photoreceptors can be noted after 4 months of the disease activity, and in a chronic case, a loss of photoreceptors and the RPE layer can be noted in the bottom scan. Now, retinal pigment epithelium integrity was assessed by Gupta et al. And here we can see a PED and a flat irregular PED over here. On a transverse C scan, we can see a PED which is noted over here with the micro rip noted, which gets resolved following treatment. And pachychoroid pigment epithelopathy is basically RP abnormalities and pigmentary changes affecting the areas of choroidal thickening without any signs of SRF. And basically, this is a part of the spectrum of pachychoroid, which also includes PCV. Mottling of RP, irregular RP elevations terms as drusenoid RP lesions with absence of dross soft drusens. The clinical features do resemble that of CSR. Sometimes these patients are falsely labeled as patients with age-related macular degeneration. It falls in the spectrum of pachychoroid. Here we can see the RP moldering and the changes which are denoting of PPE. Thanks.
Thanks, Rohit, for that amazing talk. So we'll move next to Dr. Rajanarayanan. Dr. Rajanarayanan is Head of Retina Services, Head and Director of Clinical Research at LVPI, and he will be speaking on OCT biomarkers in PCV. Over to you, Dr. Rajanarayanan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aditya, for the invitation and opportunity to present this. Also, apologize for the delay in joining. I'll be talking on OCT biomarkers in polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. And one of my favorites in general, whenever I give talks on various OCT and technology, is that these terminologies keep changing. In fact, for my fellows, I say that by the time you join your fellowship and by the time you finish your fellowship, there will be significant changes in various terminologies. But it's important to know that it's not the names that we need to remember. If you understand the disease, the pathophysiology behind any signs, that needs to be understood, and you can keep building on in the future also, because names will keep changing. By the time you retire, probably it would have changed many more times. So understanding pachychoroid and pachychoroid disease is important. Pachychoroid is thick choroid. Just the presence of thick choroid does not mean that the patient has any disease. As you can see on the left hand side, you can see the halar layer, satellar layer, and the choriocapillaris underneath, the dark line beneath the RP. It's all intact, and this patient would be doing well with good vision. Whereas in pachychoroid disease, while you have this dilated pachy vessel in the halar layer, it's compressing the satellar layer. As you can see, the satellar layer here is fine, is here, it's fine. Here it's compressed, as well as the choriocapillaris. You see the choriocapillaris here is very nice, but here there is a compression. And if you probably do an FA, that's might be the area where you will have those leaks. So pachychoroid disease is something which we need to understand, and it's not just pachychoroid. Coming to OCT biomarkers of PCV, new and new biomarkers will keep coming in the future also, as more and more better technologies come or better understandings come. But you will start seeing some changes or differences from what we have known so far. One of them is that the consensus group on PCV has said that it should not be called polyp, it should be called as polypoidal lesion for various reasons. But one of the biomarkers on OCT is a thumb-like lesion. As you can see here, you see a sharp elevated peak or a thumb-like peak. This is what should raise suspicion of PCV. In fact, among the OCT criteria for diagnosis of PCV, this is one of the criteria. And what is the sharpness? If the angle of elevation is more than 70 degrees, at this time they are given a cutoff of 70 degrees. If the angle of elevation is 70, 80 or 90 degrees, like here it's almost perpendicular from the RP, that's when you call it as a sharp peak PED, and you should consider PCV in such cases. The second diagnostic criteria on OCT is notched PED or a multilobulated PED. Here you can see multilobulations of pigment epithelial detachment. In fact, these are hemorrhagic pigment epithelial detachment. You can see the line scan going through the polypoidal lesion. This is actually a notched PED, but the other criteria for suspecting or diagnosing PCV on the basis of OCT is a hyporeflective lumen, a ring-like lesion under the RP. So you see this ring-like lesion. This is also considered as a diagnostic criteria. So far we have considered tall peak PED or thumb-like PED, a multilobulated or notch PED, and a ring-like lesion under the RP detachment is also highly suggestive of PCV. Another important sign is the double layer sign. The double layer sign is a separation of the RPE from the Brooks membrane. So for anyone to understand biomarkers on any disease, you must know the normal OCT anatomy. So this is the RPE and this is the Brooks membrane, and you see this in between there is a reflective lesion, and that reflective lesion is what is used to be called as branching vascular network, which is basically choroidal neovascularization. So this is actually a neovascularization. We used to call it BVN, now it's a branching neovascular network, so they call it as BNN. So whatever terminology it is, this is the double layer sign or neovascularization. At the edge of this, you may have polyps. So this is another important biomarker for PCV. So this is the group PCV consensus group who had given these criteria. This has been published in ophthalmology this year, and they have shown this tall peak PED, hyporeflective ring-like lesions, and multilobulated or a notch PED. You have the double layer sign, dilated Haller's layer. If there is more subretinal fluid, it's a very important sign again. In many ARMD lesions, you'll have intraretinal fluid and subretinal fluid in different proportions. But in PCV, what is seen normally is a very high amount of SRF, but very minimal amount of intraretinal fluid. So that's also an indicator for PCV, but it's not an important criteria. The important criteria are tall peak PED, hyporeflective ring lesion, and notch PED or multilobulated PED, and a double layer sign. So these are the four main. And then on fast OCT, you can have at the level of the RP, an irregular RP, and if you have subretinal hemorrhage more than 4 days diameters and an orange nodule, these are the non-OCT criteria for PCV. This is another picture from the same consensus study. You can see the tall peak PED, and there can be within the PEDs, there can be another lesion like a polypoidal lesion. Coming to a little bit about OCT angiography, why we have not discussed OCT angiography and only OCT, because OCT angiography is not very good in detecting polypoidal lesions. On the right is ICG, on the left is OCT angiography. What you can see is that there is in the choriocapillary slab, there is a network of vessels, which is the branching neovascular network or BVN. It is good. OCT angiography is very good in detecting the neovascular complex, but it's not good in detecting the polyps. So in this patient who has polyps, this OCT angiography has not picked them up. But OCT is good in detecting the polyps, as you can see here on the scan above, and the double layer sign. If you look at the scans below, you will be able to see the double layer sign. So structural OCT overall is now considered better than OCT angiography for non-ICG diagnostic of PCV. This is another case from one of my patients who has multiple notch PEDs with subretinal hemorrhage. This is one of the features, and there can be quiescent PCV. Why I'm bringing it up is not all cases of PCV need to be treated. Some of them are inactive, or some of them may be in very advanced stage of scarring. This patient has, as you can see, a thumb-like lesion. There is also a notch here, but there is no fluid. So this patient can be observed as long as it's extramacular and the patient has good vision. Coming to a little bit about recurrence patterns, while at baseline we may not do ICG in many patients, but what about recurrence? Can you look at OCT and still predict recurrence, or look at early recurrence? Now recurrence, if you see on ICG, a lot of patients will have late geographic hyperfluorescence. After treatment, if you give some gap, the vascularity or the neovascularization starts coming up again, and later on you may have polyps coming back again, but initially it's the neovascular network which comes back again. And if you can see this ICG from different time points, you can see initially only the network is remaining. Remember that branching network never will go away, it will always stay. But the late geographic hyperfluorescence will start coming on later on along with polish. But what about OCT? Can you look at the OCT and look at worsening or recurrence? So if the double layer sign is increasing in height, or if the double layer sign is increasing in width, that is an indication, a non-ICG indication, that this patient is worsening or having a recurrence. So in conclusion, OCT angiography is good to detect the branching neovascular network complex, but OCT, structural OCT bead scans are good to detect the polypoidal lesions compared to OCT angiography. Thumb-like lesions, sharp peak PD and notch PD are the important criteria for PCV on OCT, and recurrence should be suspected on OCT when the double layer sign enlarges in height or width. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Arun, for that enlightening talk. Next, I would like to call upon my dear friend, Dr. Sharath Hegde. He's a practicing VR surgeon from Prasad Netralaya, Udupi and Mangalore, and he has done a recent AI course at IISc Bangalore. Over to you, Sharath, for your talk on OCT biomarkers in pachychoroid. Sharath, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. Thanks, Aditya, for giving the opportunity in this instruction course, and good morning, everyone. So, pachychoroid is itself a biomarker in the OCT nowadays, and the pachy means it's a thick, and the pachychoroid literally means it's a thick choroid. And you know, the pachychoroid disease has a characterized by, as Dr. Rajanan nicely described it, they have a focal or diffuse increase in the choroidal thickness. They're also associated with the pachy vessels, which are the permanently dilated vessels which can be seen. Along with that, you can see there is a presence of attenuated choriocapillaries and the Hattel layers, and in some patients they will be having a presence of RP abnormalities also. So similarly, one more case of PCV showing the similar pictures where there is increase in the choroidal thickness, the presence of pachy vessels, and the presence of attenuated choriocapillaries and the RP abnormalities. So pachychoroid is itself nowadays is a spectrum of diseases which includes pachychoroid pigment epithelopathy, central serous chorioretinopathy, pachychoroid neovasculopathy, polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, focal choroidal excavation, and peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome, in which polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy and CSI has been already described. So I will just take through the OCT biomarkers which are common to all these pachychoroid disease spectrums. So the foremost important is these cases we will see is the focal or diffuse increase in the choroidal thickness. Here you can see in the first image where you can see the normal, the choroidal image we say up to the 300 micrometers, and in the second image you can see there's a large focal diffuse increase in the choroidal thickness of around 800 micrometers. Normally, the certain studies has shown that the normal choroidal thickness is around 200 to 350 micrometers. And these can be changed, the thickness can be influenced by the variety of factors, which includes age, axial length, refractive error, the blood pressure as well. Certain diurnal variation also has been noted. Other foremost important thing in any saying it as pachychoroid is presence of pachy vessels. These are the permanently dilated vessels in the Haller's layer, and these pachy vessels are a large hyperreflective lumen, and they usually do not taper towards the posterior pole, and they retain the large caliber, which can be nicely seen in ENFAS image and has been nicely described by Dancingini et al., where they go up to the posterior pole and they terminate abruptly. And these pachy vessels can be present diffusely or focally depending on the condition, whether it's a pachydrusen or pachychoroid neovasculopathy or CSC, it can be diffusely present or focally present. The other important feature is the attenuation of the inner choroids of the choriocapillaries and the Sattler's layer. So what we see is like when above the pachy vessels, we will see the Haller's layers and the choriocapillary layers may get thinned out. So only sometimes we can say the overall choroidal thickness may be normal, but before to say it as a pachychoroid, only the choroidal thickness we should not take into consideration. We should see how is the inner choroid, whether there is the attenuation is there or not, also becomes an important finding. Here you can see the Sattler's and the choriocapillaris has got attenuated. One more study has shown that there can be also a presence of thinning of the outer nuclear layer, and this thinning is more commonly seen in pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy than in uncomplicated pachychoroid disorders. So what they said is like there can be degeneration of photoreceptors and the RP can occur without in the absence of subretinal fluid. The other important thing is the choroidal vascular permeability will be increased in the case of pachychoroid, which usually can be best seen in ICGA than in, it's very difficult to identify in OCT. So coming to the OCT biomarkers in a specific conditions. So all these condition spectrum, what I said, all will be having a typical pachychoroid OCT findings, what I said. Along with that, pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy, which is also called as form first of CSR, we see there will be RP mottling and the decreased fundus tessellation. There can be presence of pachyhydrosense, and usually there will be a irregular RP abnormalities which can be seen. The center serous choroidopathy biomarkers already been explained by Dr. Rohit, where you can see along with the pachychoroid findings like the increased choroidal thickness and pachyvessels, there will be a neurosensory detachment, pigment epithelial detachment, there will be hyperreflective dots and all in acute cases. And in the chronic cases, we can able to see a cystic intraretinal fluid, elongated photoreceptor outer segments, and outer retinal atrophy can also be seen. So next important entity is pachychoroid neovasculopathy. This is the latest. Initially, before the pachychoroid entity came, everything we thinking of AMD or type 1 neovascularization. But now, after the terminology of pachychoroid has come into the thing, and we see this is the choroidal pathology which is affecting. This is the new entity which has come, pachychoroid neovasculopathy, where this is a type 1 neovascularization with a lack of other identifiable risk factors like soft drusen, myopic degeneration, inflammation, or any angiostrix. This type 1 neovascularization usually they overlay the pachychoroid disease, and there will be shallow irregular RP detachment like a double layer sign, which has been nicely now told by Dr. Raja Nayanan, where you will see a presence of the RP layer and also the Brooks layer can be seen separately. And the OCT angio will definitely pick it up the neovascular network in these cases. The OCT biomarkers of polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy has been nicely described by Dr. Rajan Nayanan, like the presence of a large PED, thumb-shaped PED, having a hyperreflective lumen within the PED, notch PED, and a double layer sign. So I'm not going to touch more about that. Coming to the focal choroidal excavation. So these focal choroidal excavation are the localized excavation which can be seen in the presence of any other associated pachychoroid disorders. And there are usually two patterns of excavation can be seen. So one is the conforming pattern, where you can see the photoreceptor tips are in direct contact with the RP, and in a non-conforming pattern, these photoreceptor tips will be detached, and sometimes it appears like a hyperreflective area. It may represent SRF in these areas. The other recent clinical entity which has been described is the peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome, where they have said the maximum choroidal thickness occurs very close to the optic nerve than in the subfoveal area. That means the most of the pachyvessels and the thickened choroid usually we see near the optic disc than in the foveal area. So coming to summarize this condition, as I told, the pachychoroid disease is a characteristic feature having a focal or diffuse increase in the choroidal thickness, presence of pachyvessels, thinning of the choriocapillaris and the Sattler layers, and without retinal pigment epithelial abnormalities. The other specific biomarkers for the specific entity have already been explained. Like in CSR, you can able to see a neurosensory detachment, the outer retinal atrophy in a case of chronic condition, the presence of RP abnormality in pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy, the presence of double layer cell in a sign of pachychoroid neovasculopathy, the large PEDs, notch PEDs in a case of pachychoroid vasculopathy, typical localized excavation in a focal choroidal excavation, and in the thickening of the choroidal vessels in the area of the nasal area in the peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharad, for your excellent talk. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Pradeep Sagar. He's a young, dynamic retina faculty from Shankara Eye Institute, Shankara Eye Hospital. He has special interest in retinal imaging and he'll be speaking on OCT biomarkers in diabetic retinopathy. Over to you, Pradeep.
Good morning, one and all. Dr. Aditya, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go on.
I would like to thank Dr. Aditya for giving me this opportunity and including me in this instruction course. I will be discussing about OCT biomarkers in diabetic macular edema. I will be discussing under two sections, the biomarkers which predict the functional outcome and the biomarkers that predict the anatomical outcome. Coming to the biomarkers that predict the functional outcome related to the inner retina, disorganization of retinal inner layers, abbreviated as DRIL. It is defined as the inability to identify boundaries between the ganglion cell layer, inner plexiform layer, and the inner nuclear layer and outer plexiform layer. Here we can see that the boundary between the outer plexiform layer and the inner nuclear layer is intact. But if we see on this side, we see that the individual layers cannot be made out distinctly. This indicates DRIL. It is usually associated with severe macular ischemia, as we can see that the corresponding OCTA of the patient shows significant fluid areas. Coming to an example, here we can see that this patient of DME has a DRIL on one half of the fovea, as we can see over here. Post-treatment, though there is complete resolution of intraretinal cystoid spaces, the visual acuity gain is limited. This is partly due to the presence of DRIL. So DRIL is a very well-studied biomarker which indicates a poor functional outcome in diabetic macular edema. Coming to the intraretinal cystoid spaces, it has been described that presence of more number of intraretinal cystoid spaces and the increase in the ratio of these spaces to the area of retina, which is defined as the area ratio, is associated with a poor long-term visual acuity. We know that the intraretinal cystoid spaces are usually located in the inner retina, but they are known to result in a photoreceptor disruption over long term. It has been hypothesized to be due to the detrimental effect of these spaces on the Muller cells, which are essential for the survival of the neurons. And it is also due to the disruption of the outer plexiform layer, where the photoreceptor cells synapse with the secondary neurons. So even though the spaces are present within the inner retina, over a long time, it is known to be associated with disruption of photoreceptors. So it's a poor prognostic indicator. The next biomarker, the pearl necklace sign, it is defined as the presence of hyperreflective dots in a contagious ring around the inner wall of cystoid space, as we can see over here. It is usually a precursor of hard exudate clump. So when the macular edema resolves, here the hard exudate would precipitate. So if it's located at the fovea, it is an indicator of poor visual outcome, as the hard exudates which precipitates at the fovea results in outer retinal disruption. Bridging retinal processes. Here we can see that within this cyst, there is a bridging process. This process usually is indicative of a better visual function, as they would be suggestive of a neural elements bridging the inner and outer retina. So we can see that in this patient, the visual acuity was fairly good at presentation, but due to persistent edema, the bridging retinal process are lost, and we can see that the visual acuity has reduced. When this patient was treated with laser photocoagulation, we can see that the macular edema has resolved completely, but the visual acuity did not improve much. So the bridging retinal processes would be an indicator of good visual outcome in diabetic macular edema. Coming to the predictors of functional outcome related to outer retina, the integrity of ellipsoid zone and the interdigitation zone. Here we can see that the ellipsoid zone is intact even at the area where there is a macular neurosensory detachment, and post-treatment we can see that there is complete resolution of macular edema and there is an intact ellipsoid zone and an interdigitation zone. So the patient gained a very good visual acuity, whereas in this case we can see that there is loss of ellipsoid zone at the area of neurosensory detachment and even in other areas, but the external limiting membrane is preserved. Post-treatment, there is a resolution of macular edema, and we can see that the external limiting membrane is preserved, but the ellipsoid zone is disrupted and interdigitation zone is disrupted. So in this case, the visual acuity improvement was minimal. Whereas in this case, we can see that both the external limiting membrane and ellipsoid zone is disrupted. Though there is complete resolution of macular edema, we can see that there is no improvement in visual acuity. So in patients, if we see that there is an intact external limiting membrane and ellipsoid zone, the visual acuity is usually better and the functional outcome is good compared to those cases in which there is an ellipsoid zone disruption with an intact external limiting membrane. But if both external limiting membrane and ellipsoid zone are disrupted, the visual acuity tend to be quite poor. Coming to the next biomarker, the subretinal fluid. The presence of pre-treatment subretinal fluid at baseline was noted to be associated with better visual outcome compared to the cases without any subretinal fluid at baseline in post hoc study of Reed and Rice, whereas a similar observation was not seen in the post hoc analysis of VISTA and VIVID, which evaluated aflibercept in DME. The subretinal fluid has been shown to be a better biomarker of functional outcome in patients treated with dexamethasone implant also. The mechanism is not very well understood. Coming to the predictors of anatomical outcome, the predictors of anatomical outcome usually also influences the functional outcome, as if there is anatomical improvement, then only we can expect a functional improvement. Coming to the vitreoretinal interface, vitreomacular adhesion. It is defined as perifoveal separation of posterior cortical vitreous from the surface of retina with attachment within the central 1500 microns of fovea. If the attachment is less than 1500 micron, it's called focal vitreomacular adhesion. If it's broader than 1500 micron, it's called broad vitreomacular adhesion. With intravitreal injections, posterior vitreous detachment occurs. It is more often seen with focal vitreomacular adhesion than broad vitreomacular adhesion. The development of PVD is usually associated with a better resolution of macular edema. Though there is no traction in these cases, the development of PVD is supposed to be helpful in resolution of macular edema by a few hypotheses. As we can see that there is increase in oxygenation of the inner retina and there is a removal of the reservoir of factors in the premacular space, which would be contributing to the development of macular edema. There is only one study which has evaluated its role as a biomarker, so it needs further studies to confirm. Epiretinal membrane. Epiretinal membrane usually indicates presence of a tractional component, a tangential traction on the surface of the retina. Here we can see that in this case, though there is complete resolution of submacular fluid post-treatment, the retinal thickness is almost same. This is mainly due to the traction exerted by the epiretinal membrane on inner retina. It would need a surgery to remove the epiretinal membrane. Coming to the predictors of anatomical outcome in inner and outer retina, the hyperreflectivity.
Doctor, may I please request you to sum up within a minute?
Sure, thank you. Hyperreflectivity of cyst wall. Here we can see that in the cyst, the wall is hyperreflective and it usually indicates a more severe photoreceptor disruption, as we can see over here, which is evidenced by the presence of, by the loss of ellipsoid zone and external limiting membrane. It is associated with poor visual acuity. It is usually suggestive of a persistent cyst and the chances of remission is lesser. As an example, here we can see that the same case post-intravitreal anti-VEGF, the cyst has only partially decreased in size. Hyperreflective foci, it has been described well. It's a small discrete lesion less than 30 micron in size. They are dot shaped. They have equal or greater reflectivity than RPE band. It is described that it is an indicator of poor response to anti-VEGF, as we can see over here. But it is also described that they may respond better to steroid. To the choroid, the subfoveal choroidal thickness, if it is.
Doctor, with all due respect, I wish that you could just come to the concluding slide.
Yeah, thank you. it is a better anatomical and functional outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Pradeep, for that wonderful presentation. Next. Next, I'll be presenting on OCT biomarkers and retinal vein occlusions. Are the slides visible?
Yes, doctor, the slide is visible.
Perfect. All right. So let's begin. I have no financial disclosures, and just to understand the OCT changes in CRVO, we can divide them into the ones which we see in acute stages and the ones which we see in the chronic stage of CRVO. So in acute stages of CRVO, we see hyperreflective foci, PAM lesions, prominent middle limiting membrane, intraretinal fluid, and subretinal fluid. In chronic stages of the disease, we see vitreomacular traction, ERM, presence of drill, loss of integrity or continuation in integrity of outer retinal layers, and other degenerative changes. So let's go over one by one. First of all, PAM. PAM or paracentral acute middle maculopathy. These are characteristic lesions involving the inner nuclear layer. This develops in response to ischemia of deep and intermediate capillary plexus. They are seen in non-ischemic variant of CRVO, and subsequently they atrophy. Once this lesion resolves, there is an atrophy at the level of inner nuclear layer, which can cause or give rise to persistent scotoma. So the importance to identify these PAM lesion is that we understand this, identify this in early stages, and counsel the patient of this scotoma, which they might complain in later stages of the disease. Even after the vision is good, they might complain of these persistent scotomas. Now, few other important points which are to be noted in regards to PAM lesions is that these are seen in younger individuals. They are not associated with any systemic disease. And on many occasions, it's associated with cilioretinal artery occlusion. Coming to our next OCT biomarker, which is prominent middle limiting membrane. So we know that the major cause of vision loss in acute CRVO is macular ischemia and macular edema. PMLM is defined as hyperreflective line, which is noted at the level of outer plexiform layer on OCT. This is an indicator of acute retinal ischemia and is associated with poor visual prognosis. It's very important to note that as PAM was seen in non-ischemic variant, PMLM is seen in ischemic variant of CRVO. So identifying PMLM or areas of these acute retinal ischemia can help us to predict the final visual outcome in these patients. Hyperreflective foci. So as it has already been discussed, these are small, discrete, well-circumscribed, dot-shaped lesions with equal or greater reflectivity than RPE. And many theories have been attempted to explain its pathophysiology. Two most common ones are that they occur as a result of retinal inflammation, or they can occur due to extravasation of proteins and lipids due to breakdown of blood-retinal barrier. In retinal vein occlusions, they are distributed throughout the retinal layers, but their concentration is maximum at the level of outer plexiform layer. And they are also regarded as precursor or initial formations for hard exudates. Coming to the chronic changes, So vitreoretinal interface abnormalities such as epiretinal membrane or vitreomacular traction are known to occur in response to VEGF, tissue necrosis factor, which are released by the ischemic retina. They contribute to persistent vision loss and metamorphopsia even after anti-VEGF treatment. They can lead to traction maculopathy, and thus to treat such cases, vitrectomy may be warranted. Coming to our next chronic entity, which is disorganization of retinal inner layers or DRIL. DRIL is defined as loss of demarcation between ganglion cell layer, inner plexiform layer, inner nuclear layer, and outer plexiform layer. So inner 4 layers, there's a loss of demarcation in that. Further, the foveal DRIL is defined as inability to distinguish two boundaries between two inner retinal layers in more than 50% of foveal 1 millimeter zone. So what does the DRIL indicate? The DRIL indicates the anatomical damage to the visual transmission in retinal layers. And more importantly, it indicates ischemia of inner retinal circulation, that is at the level of superficial capillary plexus. Their presence is associated with increased number of injections which might be needed to treat the disease, recurrence of macular edema, minimal to moderate visual gain even after treatment. Integrity of outer retinal layers or the photoreceptors. So now OCT allows us to evaluate the integrity of inner retinal layers, that is external limiting membrane, which is the junction between Muller cell and the inner segment of the photoreceptor. Ellipsoid zone, which is the junction between inner and outer photoreceptors, and interdigitation zone, which marks the attachment of outer segment of photoreceptors to the RP cell biceps. And any discontinuity in these 3 hyperreflective bands is associated with poor visual gain. And out of all the OCT biomarkers which determine the visual outcome, this is the most important one. Coming to the next OCT biomarker, which are the degenerative changes at the level of ganglion cell layer. So ganglion cell layer contains ganglion cell bodies whose dendrites form the inner plexiform layer and the axons form the optic nerve. Now ganglion cells cysts have been postulated to form as a result of intracellular edema, for example, Muller cell apoptosis, or due to leakage from superficial capillary plexus. They signify the damage to inner retina as well as the superficial capillary plexus. Thus, they are regarded as a poor predictive factor for the visual outcome. Thank you. So, since we have time, we can have some questions. Just a minute. Dr. Sharad.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me how can we differentiate which OCT biomarkers can be used to differentiate ARMD from pachychoroid?
See, the most common thing what happens in the AMD and the pachychoroid, the most important biomarker is to see how much is the choroidal pachyvessels. It is the most important biomarker to be taken care for. What happens in the AMD? In the AMD, there will be thinning of the chorocapillaries, there will be thinning of the satellites and the other hadular layers also. Overall, there will be thinning of the choroidal layer. But in a PCV or any pachychoroid spectrum, what you see, there will be a dilated choroidal vessels, pachyvessels, which is the most important thing to be taken care for. And also the pachydrusense. So sometimes what happens in the AMD, we see a lot of drusens, and in the PCV, you won't see any drusen or any drusen or any other lesions we see in the AMD like soft drusens, but we see sometimes called as pachydrusen. So which has a also under the pachydrusen, we can able to see there will be dilated choroidal vessels. So the most important thing is the Pachy whether to differentiate AMD and the PC, any pachychoroid spectrum.
My next question would be for you, Dr. Umesh. Yes. So, Dr. Umesh, apart from the OCT biomarkers which you mentioned, any other which can help us, or any other less important ones which we need to consider while we are seeing a case of wet ARMD, which can help us prognosticate and treat?
Yeah, so there was a recent publication in AJO this year trying to look at the predictive value of the color fundus photographs against the biomarkers. So they divided the predicting calculation into 4 types, like only fundus pictures with minimal biomarkers. Minimal biomarkers means it could be just the Brusen characteristic and the hyperreflective foci. And biomarkers which were extensively used. Just the way we mentioned about the outer retinal tubulations or the collapsing drusen or the drusen ooge. So they taken together was in the 3rd group, and 4th group was color fundus photo and the minimal biomarkers together. So they found that no matter what program that you might choose, the predictive value of all these parameters with normal means comparable. So the traditional teaching has been that we should be looking at the drusen characteristics like the drusen size, drusen type, whether it is soft or a hard drusen, its proximity to fovea, and the pigmentary changes. So the one which I could not include in this presentation was a progressive migration of these pigments to the inner retina. So this is one of the other biomarkers which should be kept in mind when these patients are followed up longitudinally. So mostly these eyes are the contralateral eyes of the treatment eyes. So it is easier for these eyes to.
Just to bring it to your notice, we have exactly 13 minutes left to conclude the session.
Yeah, we'll be done by then.
Sure,
Please
doctor.
back up.
Sure. मनोज जी टाइमर बंद कर दीजिए.
Okay, I think that is the other biomarker which I would highlight in predicting the progression of neovascular AMD or atrophic AMD.
Thanks, Dr. Umesh. So my next question is for you, Pradeep. So can you elaborate on association of subfoveal choroidal thickness and DME?
Dr. Aditya, when it comes to subfoveal choroidal thickness, there are a few contrasting reports, but what is normally accepted is that with progression of diabetic retinopathy, as the severity increases, the subfoveal choroidal thickness decreases. And it has been documented that when the subfoveal choroidal thickness is more, one is that the disease process will be at an early stage. And the second thing is that the perfusion to the outer retina would be probably more in such cases when compared to those cases with a thin subfoveal choroid. So presence of higher subfoveal choroidal thickness is documented to be associated with a better integrity of the outer retina, that is the ellipsoid zone, interdigitation zone, and in turn a better visual acuity. When it comes to response to treatment, it has been documented in a few reports that the subfoveal choroidal thickness is higher in cases with macular edema, but it's not consistently reported. It is reported that it may be mainly a VEGF dependent process. So as we give anti-VEGF, the subfoveal choroidal thickness decreases, and since it decreases, the VEGF is the major culprit in macular edema in such cases. Whereas in cases with lesser subfoveal choroidal thickness, there would be other mechanisms other than VEGF which would be responsible for the macular edema. So they say that like if the choroidal thickness is more, it's more of a VEGF dependent process, and the macular edema would resolve well with anti-VEGF. So it is considered to be a biomarker of both a good anatomical and functional outcome.
Thanks, Pradeep. So my last question is for Rohit. Rohit, you there?
Yeah, Aditya, I am there.
Yeah, Rohit, so can you just elaborate upon the use of autofluorescence in CSCR in understanding and role of autofluorescence as a biomarker for acute and chronic CSCR?
Well, yeah, well, fundus autofluorescence is quite useful in, as a biomarker for CSR patients. There are typical patterns which, we can see in patients with acute and in chronic stages. If you allow, I'll just see if I can share a photograph of autofluorescence. Just give me a second.
Sure, please.
Yeah, I'll just do that. So here we can see that is my slide visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so the first photograph, we can see that there is a acute CSR and there is a hyporeflective layer which is seen on the fundus autofluorescence. There are certain hyper and hyporeflective layers which are seen when it is at 3 months, and there is outer the elongation of the photoreceptors which is seen on the SD-OCT. And finally, in the chronic stage, when there is a loss of RP and there is loss of photoreceptors, we can see the loss of RP over here. So we can see a stepwise change when the chronicity progresses on fundus autofluorescence.
Thanks, Rohit. Dr. Rajiv, would you like to add anything to that?
I just, if I can ask a question, Aditya.
Yeah, Rohit, go ahead.
Yeah, so, with the PDT being not available because of the lack of verteprofen dye, what are the, what is the approach which is kept by the, the faculty when we are treating patients with the chronic CSR, where we usually used to use half fluence PDT before? Any comments, Dr. Sharath, Dr. Pradeep, or Dr. Aditya?
Sharath here.
Yeah.
I usually go ahead with the spironolactone tablet of elperanone tablet in a chronic CSC. And
Yeah.
previously, I also have tried micropulse laser also in the case of chronic CSC, which are working. Now I don't have that facilities. I'm not doing that.
Right, right.
But if it is a very chronic CSC, I try to do ICG and distinct to see any focal laser can be done. If not possible to done, the next treatment will be like elperanone treatment. And if a micropulse laser is available, I will go ahead with that also, where I'll paint the area of the chronic, where there is a chronic RP abnormality area.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. That was really helpful.
Right. So with this, I like to thank you all. Thank the instructors for their excellent talks and for bringing out the important points on OCT biomarkers in these retinal disorders. I will also like to thank the organizers, AIOC, for seamless session and the audience for patience listening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aditya Kapoor.